Westminster Abbey is a flagship institution. It's right there at the centre of national life in this country.
Westminster Abbey is the coronation church.
The Abbey has been the place where people commemorate the great men and women of our history.
Here was the origins of Parliament.
I think of the Abbey as being an upbeat place.
The most unusual phone call was from Michelle Obama's Secret Service.
On a standard day, we would probably process 1,000 people per hour.
Even though we are a massive tourist attraction, we still are very much a living church.
Westminster Abbey represents faith at the heart of the nation.
To think that there have been people with their eyes turned in the same direction towards worship of God in this place for over 1,000 years.
There's a feeling of a really Rolls-Royce musical setup here.
Being the Queen's choristers, we really can't afford to let her down.
Quite a lot I see people crying.
When you sing, it brings tears of joy and sadness.
I do wake up every day and think this is a fantastic place to be.
It's a thrill, even after 17 years.
You believe you've got that to look after.
There's that tremendous sense of being part of something that goes back all those hundreds of years.
It's a magnificent building. I feel like I'm part of history just being here.
Autumn at Westminster Abbey marks the start of a period known in the Christian calendar as Michaelmas.
The Michaelmas term is rather curious because it's like the beginning of the year in so many different ways. After people's summer holidays, schools resume. People think of it almost as the beginning of a new year, and yet it simply continues the liturgical year towards the culmination of the liturgical year and then beginning again on Advent Sunday for a new start 4 weeks before Christmas, getting us towards the great Christmas festival.
There is something magical about hearing boys sing the carols. I mean, that once in Royal David City, once they start that, it is just wonderful.
Christmas at Abbey is a fabulous feast, just full of light and colour. The music is heavenly, really does remind us of Christ's coming among us.
The Abbey Choir School is preparing to welcome a fresh intake of boys.
I've been doing this now for more years than I care to remember, but it is always exciting because the school's always completely new each Michaelmas. And there's a sense of starting the school afresh. Actually, the boys tease me here because I say once the new boys come back, right, now we're complete, now we can begin.
8-year-old George is getting ready for his first day at his new school.
It's kind of a lurching feeling. Like I've got something that I haven't yet got that I can get if I really want to, and if I train hard and all that stuff, I can get it. I can grab it. Never slept at school before, so I'm a bit scared. The thing that I will miss the most is my family. Are you going to miss me?
For over a century, this small boarding school within the Abbey grounds has trained boys between the ages of 8 and 13 for the world-famous choir. For the new boys, it's the start of 5 years, during which they will eventually sing at daily services and at some of the nation's most important occasions.
When they arrive, there's always that little bit of apprehension how they're going to settle, whether they're going to be all right. Because it's a really big thing to be away from home. I know it's a small school, and we've got 35 boys this year, but to them, and they see all these bigger boys who are wandering around who know exactly what they're doing, and they seem very big to them. And I think it just sort of hits them, oh, I'm away from home.
Where'd you play in school?
He woke up, I think, like 6 o'clock this morning and was running around the house going, I'm going to school today. He put on his uniform really early and had to be told to take it off again because he'd get it so grubby.
Excellent. I try to encourage independence in the boys. I don't want us to be doing everything for them. So I like them to be able to dress themselves, for example. Stupid, simple little things like, you know, if you're buying a new shirt, wash it a few times because the buttonholes can be really tough for small hands.
Right, so extra items of uniform sports.
There will be moments when perhaps they feel a little bit wobbly, but there'll be something for them to do and they'll get on with it. But actually it's poor mum at home who goes past the empty bedroom or is feeling the loss, and I think it can be very difficult for parents.
It's going to be really weird for her because
I'm always singing in the house, and my brother will be at nursery and my sister will be in reception, so the house will be pretty quiet.
All summer and since Luca got in, we felt fine and confident and everything, and then today it was like, this is really happening, and he's going to come here and he's going to sleep somewhere else. So it's felt really odd today, a little bit like waiting for an exam to start.
It's lovely to have you all here. We're going to suggest that we say our farewells, so suggest fairly quickly, and then the boys are going to be whisked away by Miss Murray, and they'll make a start, but a hugely warm welcome for us all.
Just had a little anxious moment about half an hour before we left, but after that...
yeah, he didn't even want to say goodbye, really. He just wandered off. I didn't even get a kiss.
He shook my hand. First time in his life he did it.
The boys are joining an institution with a history stretching back over 1,000 years. Since its transformation from a Benedictine monastery into the great church that stands today, Westminster Abbey has been at the centre of our national life. Bound by its location next to the Palace of Westminster, it was here at the Abbey, in its 13th century chapter house, that the origins of Parliament began, when the King and his council met. Canon Andrew Tremlett is responsible for overseeing the Abbey's enduring relationship with the state.
Here we are in the most busy of the squares in London, traffic all around us. And on one side we've got Parliament, the legislature, which we think of as the houses over there, started its life in a great way within the Abbey itself. The other side over there, we've got the Supreme Court, highest court in the land. Down on the north side, we've got the Treasury, HMRC, Whitehall, Downing Street. And on the south side, we've got the Abbey and St Margaret's. So in fact, this is a fantastic place just to illustrate what I think is one of the big questions in British life, which is about where's the place of religion? And well, I think it's part of our national character. We've grown and developed as a nation, and part of that, I think, is about the monastery, the church, being part of our national texture and tapestry.
Ensuring the Abbey remains at the heart of national life is the responsibility of the Dean, assisted by a senior lay executive and 4 senior clergy called canons. The Dean's personal assistant is Dr. Non Vaughan O'Hagan.
Every season within the Abbey has got its own flavour, but I think if there's one particular season or term that's distinct, it's got to be the Michaelmas, because there's a very strong sense of it being the beginning of an academic year. But at the same time, you've got these great moments leading up to Christmas. The dates we mark off have a significance and a resonance which is over and above just this building, just this community. They're nationally important, not simply for this church, but for everybody. Our community seems to be a little pebble, and the ripples move out to communities beyond and people beyond us.
The busy Michaelmas term begins with a ceremony linked to Britain's recent past, one that highlights the Abbey's ongoing role as a keeper of the nation's history.
The relationship between the Abbey and our national life has a great many different strands to it. But clearly one of the important strands is in terms of relation with the armed services. And that's particularly obvious because of the grave of the unknown warrior being here. And there's another element to that, which is that the Queen is the head of the armed forces. So it's a natural relationship. And the annual commemoration of the Battle of Britain is an important feature of our life as an abbey.
In the first 10 days of the Battle of Britain, Goering launched 26 major attacks to get command of the air and lost 697 aircraft. The British lost 153.
The gratitude of every home in our island, in our empire, and indeed throughout the world, except in the abodes of the guilty, goes out to the British airmen who, undaunted by odds, unwearied in their constant challenge, and mortal danger, are turning the tide of the world war by their prowess and by their devotion. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.
The Battle of Britain obviously is remembered by an enormous number of people as a key moment in the life of the nation during the tremendously testing time during the Second World War, when the few stood. It's almost theological, you know, the few standing for the many, just as our Lord, you know, stands for us, as it were, hangs for us on the cross. So these few, these gallant few, stood for us.
Since 1944, the Abbey has held their service of thanksgiving for those who sacrificed their lives during the Battle of Britain in the summer of 1940.
Lovely, super. Okay, let's do the recovery of the standard rites.
Minor Canon, the Reverend Michael Macy, is responsible for arranging the service.
Putting together a special service is a jigsaw, and sometimes all the pieces fall into place exactly. Other times they just need turning a little bit.
Roger on my left here is our Chief Honorary Steward here. If he asks you to do something, follow what he asks, please, ladies and gentlemen. Unless it's something ridiculous, and then don't. Sorry.
That rules out practically everything.
It does rule out quite a lot.
Battle of Britain, because it's such a long-standing service, there's a relatively prescribed format anyway for the service. Obviously, with the veterans not getting any younger, there is an added complication, but the association, the Veterans Association, are fabulous. They work very closely with us, they tell us what their needs are, and we try to accommodate them.
To see some of these old men walking up the aisle, tremendously courageous still. We have a coffee for them before the service, and I sometimes say, you know, would you like to sit down in this? No, I'm better standing up. You know, so sort of these, they're all well into their 90s, my father's generation, and I'm just overwhelmed by it, really.
Once again, we come together on Battle of Britain Sunday to give thanks for the dedication and heroism of members of the Royal Air Force and the Allied Air Forces. Their courage marked a turning point in the war. For without their bravery, it's hard to see how the Second World War could have been won.
Immeasurable pride to be Westminster Abbey, and there we are, on one day in the year, the centre of everybody's eyes. It's just very, very reassuring, heartwarming, and you want to do your best for everybody. And it's getting harder and harder to keep a straight line.
What it really means, I think, is that we're remembering old friends that we knew who aren't here today. And that's what saddens one. There's so few of us left. I think the count last night was 57 survivors.
I'm not normally an emotional chap, but a lump comes into my throat because with me and somewhere else are old friends. And I feel very much aware of all those wonderful chaps in my squadron that I first served with as a 19-year-old schoolboy.
Next year is the 60th anniversary of the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II at Westminster Abbey, the 39th monarch to be crowned here.
Monarchs through history have contributed hugely to the life of Westminster Abbey. And it's important to get the coronation clear in our minds. It's a profoundly important religious service at which the monarch is not simply crowned, but anointed. So inevitably, the Abbey is important to the monarch.
The chair on which Queen Elizabeth II was crowned was commissioned by King Edward I in 1300 and has played a central part at coronations ever since. To mark the anniversary, surveyor of the fabric, Ptolemy Dean, has been designing a new setting to house the chair.
If you think about what the chair is, the nation has seen it as the embodiment and the symbolic representation of the monarchy itself, the heart of the state. And there's something so wonderfully British about the fact that the chair should be preserved in its sort of semi-dilapidated condition. It is an incredibly important fragment. Well, the plan for the chair is that it's going to be re-displayed in the St George's Chapel. Actually, the thought is to enclose it in a small canopy. And the canopy is like a four-poster bed. It creates a sort of sense of something precious that goes on within. How tall you make it, how wide you make it, has an effect on how big or small the chair looks. And of all the things that you could be asked to sort of tackle and display and think about, it is one of the most important objects. Everybody will be there looking at it in 2013 when we have the 60th anniversary of the coronation, and it needs to be looking right.
A model of Ptolemy Dean's design is going to be built and tried out in St George's Chapel before a new permanent display is created. It's part of a bigger plan to transform the Abbey in the 21st century. The man in charge of major projects is its lay head, Sir Stephen Lamport, the Receiver General.
It's a very old role in the history of the Abbey. I mean, it goes back to the medieval period, when it was a job that was probably done by a monk or possibly by a lay brother. And in those days, it was actually a job designed to take in the rents and the tithes of the Abbey and its estates from across the country.
Is that chapter?
Yes, that's the full set.
And then, with the Reformation and with the closing down of the monastery, this job became a job which was given to a layperson. I think I'm the 31st since the 1530s. I'm rather like the chief executive of the Abbey. I'm responsible for all the non-liturgical aspects of what the Abbey is and how it functions. So I'm responsible for the finances, for the people, for the fabric, for the fundraising. And we've all, in our different ways, been given a very small slice of the Abbey's history to be custodians for. It's never stopped still. If you look at the history of the Abbey over the last 1,000 years, it has constantly been refreshed and renewed, and we see the changes that we have done and are wanting to do as being just very much part of that process.
A recent major change has been the conversion of the old monastic food store, called the Solarium, into a cafe and restaurant, the first in the Abbey's history. In October, it was officially opened by the Duke of Edinburgh.
Your Royal Highness, I invite you to unveil the plaque.
Of even greater significance are the current plans to convert the vast unused space high above the Abbey floor, called the Triforium.
The Triforium is an extraordinary place that Henry III probably designed to be chapels, replicating the space below. And they've never really been used. We're surrounded here just at the moment by a number of things that have been collected over the years, but it's only been used for storage. And it's a vast and extraordinary place that goes all the way around the inside of the Abbey. We're planning to make it accessible to people so that we can create a display space up here and see some of the wonderful treasures that we're not able to show at the moment.
The proposals for the development of the Triforium would create the most radical alteration to the exterior of this World Heritage Site since architect Nicholas Hawksmoor added his famous West Towers in the 18th century.
The most controversial part of this proposal is the access into this space, because there are two current narrow spiral staircases which are hopeless. And so we have got to make a new spiral staircase and a lift that's suitable for disabled people. This is where we're going to hope to put the doorway in for the new lift and stair, and this monument will go up. So you'll come in through here, and it's the only piece of wall that there is which doesn't have a window in it. So this is a rather tentative study that we produced about how one might make a staircase and a lift access to up here. And it's a new tower structure that would be partly concealed by the buttress of the chapter house, which is immediately outside here. And in this crunch of Gothic mullions and tracery and pinnacles, and here's this Henry VII chapel, and effectively you're got your back to Parliament looking that way. So it's sort of as far into a corner as you can get into a corner here.
But making changes to a building of such historic importance is highly sensitive. The Abbey has to undertake thorough structural and archaeological investigations before any planning permission can be sought for their ambitious new plans. Westminster Abbey has adapted to reflect an ever-changing world, but some traditions haven't changed since the Middle Ages, when Edward the Confessor built his church here.
We enjoyed this one. Very colourful to see all the judges here with all their robes on. It brings the Abbey alive with all like the processions and all the outfits.
On October the 1st, over 600 judges take part in a religious service that heralds the start of the legal year.
Since the medieval period, the Middle Ages, judges have come from Temple, where the courts are, processed along through Westminster and come to the Abbey for a service. Before the Reformation, there was always a communion service, so they had to fast beforehand.
My figure may reveal that I haven't been on a fast for some time. But it's certainly a time to think about the fact that you have something responsible to do.
It's a significant reminder of how serious the things we do really are.
Now, I hover between being in awe of the continuity and the ceremony and thinking it's all a bit surreal, frankly.
Ever since Edward the Confessor built his palace, there's been a very obvious geographical link between the institutions of government and governance, legal institutions, and the church. And there is something phenomenally moving about seeing the judiciary at prayer.
In the 12th century, Henry II established the High Court in the Palace of Westminster. Ever since, the Abbey has been a place of reflection for the judiciary.
Wonderful seeing so many women actually robing. I gather that in the past, when they had this ceremony, there were sort of half a dozen women. And we had a room full of people getting dressed this morning, so that's all jolly exciting, isn't it?
To see the interweaving of constitutional and governmental with the religious in such an obvious way. And there are parts of the ceremony which show that so visually in terms of the wigs and the robes that are worn by the legal officers, in the same way that that's evidenced by the vestments worn by clergy, that it's not just about the individual, it's actually about the role. And in the judges' service, there's a sense that we are going not just speaking on behalf of our own generation, but we're recommitting to a series of legal principles, to an idea of Christian justice, which has underpinned these islands for centuries.
At the beginning of the legal year, we gather in the presence of Almighty God, who is the judge of all and who knows the secrets of our hearts, to renew our commitment to the service of the Crown and of all the people in the cause of justice.
Historically, as head of the judiciary, the Lord Chancellor allowed the judges to break their fast by offering them food after the service. This ritual continues today, with a breakfast held in the Great Hall of the Palace of Westminster.
Must be very quiet in your house now that you and Hugo aren't there.
As the legal year begins, the first-year boys are settling into their new school. In addition to their usual schoolwork, for 1 hour every morning, they have singing lessons as part of their training to become choristers.
Thank you, Ned.
The leap that they make from their former life up until the age of 8 to being a sort of full-blown member of the choir here is made it's not really a leap, it's made gradually. So in their first year, they're doing very little singing in the Abbey. We're just trying to sort of give them a grounding, not just physically with their singing, but also a theoretical grounding in music so they understand the notation that's in front of them.
Okay, now, can you be really advanced?
I enjoy actually singing the pieces. That's probably my favourite part. But I don't know about you, Angus.
Mine is Mr. Twinney playing the piano. It's really, really professional, and I'll probably only be able to play like that when I'm only about 20 years old.
Okay, let's do it a little bit faster. In the 1, 2, 3. Hang on. I hope that they're having fun in my rehearsals. They have to be very focused rehearsals, though, because that's one of the skills they need to be in the choir. So without being kind of draconian or miserable about it, they have to know that when they're given an instruction, it's important that they listen to that and they're able to do it straight away.
Okay, let's not go back to making a mistake once we've corrected it. 1 and 2. In. Okay, make sure.
We never know if we're all going to come in at the same time. So, like, come on, just make sure everybody comes in at the same time. And then usually we do.
Ah, somebody did a J. Somebody did a J. You've got to just do the vowels and join them up. It's tricky.
This week we've been practicing Magnificat and Nunc Dimittis in... That was last week. No, that was last week. Well, we haven't really done anything. We haven't really done any. Yeah, well, last week, it was Magnificat in D sharp, I think. No, D flat. D flat. D flat. Yeah.
They're doing really well. They're a really lively bunch and very bright. Some very good musicians there. In fact, they're all very strong. So they're a bit of a handful, but in a good way. I mean, we want lively, interesting people.
At the beginning of their second year, boys are formally accepted into the choir.
Well, one of the great things about these choirs is that every year there is a slight change of personnel through the natural processes of people leaving and going on to somewhere else. It enables a new generation to come into their own. And giving the surplice, which is the white smock-like robe that members of the choir here wear, to the boys who've completed a full year of training. And it's a sort of rite of passage, as it were.
The white surplice was originally worn in winter months by clergy to conceal fur cassocks, but became established as a chorister's gown by the 14th century.
The dean presents them with the surplice and they make promises to behave well in the choir and to try their best. And it's a sort of symbolism that they've gone through their apprenticeship and they're now ready to take part in the services.
It is the duty of the choir to lead the people of God in worship, by its conduct to set an example.
You could feel everybody's eyes watching you, and you just thought, this is how the start of being becoming a chorister.
Do you promise to be a faithful member of this choir? Do you promise to do your best at all times?
It's quite nerve-wracking just waiting for it and remembering what to say when you actually get your service presented from the dean.
I often think, gosh, in a few years' time, you'll be very different, you'll have all sorts of experiences and you'll be moving on. It's quite exciting to try and capture that moment. For a moment.
May Almighty God accept the offering of your worship and lead you in the light and obedience of Christ. Amen.
When you wear that surplice, you feel like you're setting an example. I felt
quite proud.
Yeah, I felt quite proud.
The wearing of special clothing for religious rituals dates back to the Old Testament, which calls for sacred garments to be worn when ministering in a holy place.
Let me have a look at that Advent frontal.
Maureen Jupp runs a small group of volunteers responsible for maintaining the nearly 400 vestments that Abbey clergy and lay staff use throughout the year.
You do realise this material was given by Edward VII.
Oh, right.
At his coronation.
Now retired, she applied for a job as a verger at the Abbey in 1978.
The damask, yes. My husband said, that would be a good job for you. You like history and church. And I said they would never accept a woman. Well, in those days they didn't. And so he said, well, you never know until you try. It was 5 interviews in 3 months. You had to prove that you could actually do the work, as they said, of a man. So my little test was the 4 candlesticks that are around the unknown warrior's grave. I had to carry them from the crypt up to the unknown warrior's grave. And that proves that I was strong enough. And then they phoned my husband and said, would it be all right if they offered me the job? And so that's how I became a verger of Westminster Abbey 34 years ago. As soon as I got to the Abbey, having a sort of woman's eye, would you say, I found that the vestments were really in a very poor state of repair. So I had some friends to start. And as I say, 2 of the ladies are still with me 30 years later.
You've got to go down the side seam, don't forget, don't take it out. Have we? Yeah,
Being bossy.
Along the top.
So you have chaps coming in for their cassocks to have buttons on, taken up, and so, you know, there's work all the time.
Welcome to Westminster Abbey. At 5 o'clock, Evensong will be sung in the choir, for which all visitors are welcome. Please make your way up the left-hand side of the nave and be seated by the vergers.
A refreshment car is available for passengers that wish to take it. It is slightly that, isn't it? We are sitting now in my favourite part of Westminster Abbey. We're in the heart of the building. We're in a part that the public aren't allowed normally to reach. And it's the shrine of Edward the Confessor, founder of the Abbey, the original builder of the building before the Norman conquest. And this fantastic space was created for him by King Henry III as a wonderful celebration of his predecessor. And if this doesn't convert you to Christianity, I don't know what would. You are above everything else around you, entombed and encapsulated in this heavenly, stonely paradise. One's absolutely back in the 13th and 14th centuries sitting here.
Noted for his piety, Edward the Confessor was made a saint in 1161, and his burial place has been a site of pilgrimage ever since. Today is St. Edward's Day, and pilgrims all over the country are embarking on a spiritual and physical journey to the Abbey.
We're setting off just after 6. We've got to be there for just after 11 for the Eucharist. So it's 5 hours and it's 15 miles, so that's 3 miles an hour, which actually doesn't sound that fast, but that is a fast walking pace, so we're going to be pushing it to get there, but we'll do our best.
Father Martin Powell is leading a group of 15 pilgrims from St Edward's Church in New Addington on the outskirts of South London to pray at the shrine of St Edward. The canon in charge of welcoming the pilgrims at the Abbey is Jane Hedges.
Well, Edward Tide's the time all around St Edward's Day, so it's actually St Edward's Day today, 13th of October, and that's the day that his body was translated from its original resting place in front of the high altar into the wonderful shrine that we now have, and it's been there ever since. And all of that happened back in the 13th century.
This year's been a real tough year for us. I've lost 5 friends. My dad died this year, my brother-in-law, my sister-in-law and a friend. So it's been a tough year.
I'm 78. On September the 3rd I was. And I thought, well, I've walked to Croydon, let's try it to London. And so long as the Lord's with me, with a bit of luck I'll make it.
It's quite a spiritual day for me, really, because I started chemotherapy 3 weeks ago, and I just want to connect with God on the walk and just really prove something to myself as well, that I'm not defined by my illness, really.
In a way, we've recovered pilgrimage to St Edward the Confessor in recent years. It seemed to me and to Canon Jane Hedges, my colleague, that this is a great place. But at the heart of it is our saint, a very rare survival from the Middle Ages. And if we're to encourage holiness in people and in our nation in our own day, then one way of doing it is to encourage pilgrimage.
Since the earliest days of Christianity, pilgrimage has been a way for Christians to reaffirm their faith. Traditionally, many of these journeys were undertaken barefoot.
We're a bit footsore, but we're okay. Yeah, you can see by how footsore we are.
If it hadn't been for my friends helping me, I wouldn't have made it.
It's been a brilliant experience. It's great. Come on next year.
It really, really, really hurt. Blisters, but yeah, glad that we're almost here now.
Did you walk all the way from there?
We did, yes.
Fantastic, fantastic. And then I gather you walked barefoot across the bridge?
Across the bridge, yes.
Wonderful. Well, I hope it's been a good journey.
It's been fantastic.
I know that he's going to be with me and he's going to see me through the journey, which he did. Got sore feet, but other than that, I'm quite all right. Coming into the chapel, when we go to St Edward's tomb, the whole thing will be finished.
The heart of Christianity isn't an institution, it's a movement inspired by experiences of God, beliefs about God. It's not rites and ceremonies, it's a whole way of life.
The Reverend Vernon White is the canon theologian responsible for religious study and teaching.
A canon theologian's role, above all, is bringing people into conversation about some of the mysteries of the whole of life, not just what goes on in church, and to try and bring together, for example, the history which is embedded in the Abbey, quite literally in the monuments and the building, and to ask the question in a lecture, a seminar, in a private conversation, what are God's purposes through that history?
2 years ago, the Abbey received a request from the Army Training Centre at Purbright in Surrey, asking if they could visit with their new recruits.
The young soldiers come quite near the beginning of their training to a day devoted to what is called the realities of war. And part of that visit includes standing round that grave of the unknown warrior.
I'm just going to say a little bit about where we are, although you may well know about the tomb of the unknown warrior here. Put here in 1920 at the suggestion of a British Army chaplain, David Railton, wrote to the Dean of Westminster at the time, who discussed it with the Prime Minister Lloyd George, and they agreed that it would be a good idea for an unknown warrior to be buried here. 4 bodies of unknown soldiers were disinterred from various military cemeteries around where the fighting had taken place in the First World War. A brigadier was blindfolded. The brigadier just put his hand on one of the 4, and that was the one that was chosen. So nobody knows at all who it is who is here.
I feel it's quite important for us to come and visit and pay respects to the Tomb of the Unknown Warrior. Seeing something like this bring home realities of war.
When you're watching films and things, you can't really relate to it, whereas when you're here, it really does hit hard, and that one day we could be in the Unknown Warrior's shoes.
For me personally as well, this remembrance is really special to me because one of my friends, I lost one of my really good friends not too long, about a week ago she got buried, and she was the 3rd female as well to pass away. So coming in there today, it's a special occasion for me personally.
In 1928, 10 years after the First World War ended, people began to lay crosses on the green between St Margaret's Church and the Abbey, in memory of those who had died. Every November, the Field of Remembrance stands as a symbol of the nation's respect for those who have given their lives serving their country.
At the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, the First World War ended. That date, that time, have become a symbolic moment on which to pause in silent remembrance and gratitude.
I see the spiritual future and mission of the Abbey always to engage with a wider world, to look outwards, and the Abbey has increasingly found itself in a role where it can offer hospitality and a safe place for real conversation and meeting between people who come from different faiths, from no faith, and also from different churches, of course, not just the Anglican Church.
Today we're having a group of Muslims to have a Muslim-Christian dialogue about interfaith marriage. And obviously, during the course of the day, the Muslims within the group would like to pray. And we've decided that this is probably the best space to allow them to do so. But I understand that it's important for any space in which Muslim prayers take place not to have any images of either animals or humans in them. So things like this, which have sort of animal depictions of them, I'm removing from the room in order to make it a space that's comfortable for them. Because after all, if we don't welcome people properly, then what are we here for, really? So that's what I'm doing. Obviously, they are praying towards Mecca, but precisely in which direction that is in relation to this room, I'm not entirely clear. But I can only assume that they would know precisely in which direction they need to use the room. But it's roughly in that direction.
Ready for a meeting I had with the Christian Muslim Forum?
Yeah, in Jerusalem Chamber. If you go through the archway on the left-hand side and up the stairs.
Canon Andrew Tremlett is hosting this event for the Christian Muslim Forum.
My role as Canon Rector includes relationships with Parliament, Whitehall, other faith communities. So this is a great place to launch. These are interfaith ethical marriage guidelines for Muslims and Christians.
Good afternoon, everybody, and a very, very warm welcome to Westminster Abbey.
The idea is that these will now be published for all churches, all mosques across the country as guidance. It's not that this becomes law set in stone that they have to use, but it's being offered as pastoral best practice, and the proof will be in the pudding.
The growing and increasing number of the interfaith marriage, at least a couple a week we are getting together. So the need is increasingly there.
I've been aware of interfaith marriages happening in this country for 30 years or so, but it's the first time I've seen religious leaders, especially from the Muslim and Christian traditions, coming together and openly discussing some of the difficult issues. So I think Westminster Abbey has really set an example here by helping to launch a very high-profile event like this, which makes it easier for mosques and synagogues, other churches, temples, to also hold similar discussions in their premises.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. La ilaha illallah.
It's a national issue, and this is kind of a national place, a place of national importance where events that matter in the life of the country get marked. So it's a great honour to be here to think about this big religious and social issue.
If people are in any way worried that the Christian Church is straying onto territory which should not be its own, then I think I will want to say, look, all political life, all social life has some sort of moral dimension. I believe it has some sort of spiritual dimension too. And so, in fact, life is seamless. You can't separate out one bit from another.
Half hour on that verse, but I haven't got time to, so listen up.
As well as singing at daily worship and special services, the choir produces 1 or 2 commercial recordings a year.
You can never really recreate an actual building itself with the best gadgets in the world. So what you really want to do is capture the real McCoy, as it were, rather than trying to fake it with electronics.
Edit the recording whenever there's a page turn, are we? Got to get the page over sooner and silently, all right?
We did quite a lot of rehearsal to make this hymns perfect.
Been banged on the head about words, getting the words exactly right, because that's quite crucial, especially with hymns.
The word prrr, remember you can pitch the R there, boys. Sing prrr on the note, just the R.
For us, it's principally a kind of eavesdropping exercise, really. I don't want them to do anything that they wouldn't normally do. Maybe I might ask them for a little bit more text than they might normally do. This is a disc of hymns. I'm going to ask them perhaps to put a little bit more dare one say, sincerity into the delivery of the text than they might do in the environment of a service. I'm very optimistic, because it's such a well-oiled ship, that this will go fabulously well.
James, I think we've got talkback going now. Hurrah, yes. Good.
OK, in that case, I suggest that we start with Praise My Soul, the King of Heaven.
Good plan.
You happy to go?
Yeah, go for it.
When you're singing evensong, you're only singing to the amount of people that are in the Abbey. But when there's a recording, many more people will hear you, and you sort of feel pleased that you're letting more people hear you.
Nobody gets rich recording hymns or sacred choral music, and it's not about earning money. The underlying rationale for recording is not actually commercial. It's far more interesting than that. And there really is an ambassadorial role. I mean, the thing is to have the work of the choir out there, because the choir is part of the DNA of the Abbey.
Autumn turns to winter. In the basement of the Abbey, the works department is focused on the heating.
Right, here we are. This is the Abbey's boiler room. It supplies all the heat for the Abbey, and the most important radiator, the one in the Dean's office. That goes, we're in trouble. Keeping the Abbey warm is quite a challenge. We've got 3 big boilers here, which are more than capable of doing it. But because we have the doors open all day, there's so many drafts coming through where the public are in and out, it's very difficult sometimes to keep the heat retained in the Abbey. We've had some issues past week. Thursday, we had a power failure. Myself and Wayne, the electrician, we were here till 1:30 in the morning. As I live in Chelmsford in Essex, it was easier for me just to try and sleep in our works canteen. Things we do for the Abbey, honestly.
2013 marks a major event for the Abbey, the 60th anniversary of the Queen's coronation. Now, after 5 months of planning, Ptolemy Dean is trying out a model of the plinth he has designed to present the ancient coronation chair.
Amazing. We'll see whether it's too high or too low, I think, in a minute. You're going to have the hardest lift because you're going to lean over to pick it up.
It's been conserved and structurally stabilised, so it's in very good condition, better condition than it has been for a very long time.
I'm all right.
Because we've never done a 4-man lift on it before, we usually use planks and things like that, so to be actually touching it just makes me a little bit anxious, but they're very good.
Okay.
We were worried that if you left it in the centre of a vast expanse, it would look minuscule. But actually, it looks rather, you know, when it's got the red drape, it'll look quite nice. And I think we need to get in place the metal railing that we're going to propose to put here, so that we can then gauge where the right line is to stop people from coming too close. You know, one wants it to look timeless, effectively, and hopefully to last till the next coronation or the coronation after that.
The design now has to be approved by the Abbey and Buckingham Palace before the permanent plinth can be built out of oak in time for next year's celebration. Early December is the end of the liturgical year. Preparations begin for the great festival of Christmas.
Christmas is obviously a beautiful and wonderful season. And for us, the birth of our Lord Jesus Christ is wonderful, and we have to prepare for it. So we prepare for Christmas through Advent. So Advent, the 4 weeks before Christmas, are supposed to be a solemn and penitential time when we remember death, judgment, heaven, and hell. That has to be living alongside the fact that probably for 2 months or even 3, the shops are full of Santa and decorations and Christmas songs. And people are doing their shopping and thinking about how they can afford Christmas and all the rest of it.
Christmas in the shop is a very busy time for us. We usually start our Christmas here in October and have a sort of 3-month build up to the big day. We get all our advent calendars and Christmas cards out, and then nearer to Christmas we have all our decorations out and dress our windows. There's an expectation from the customer that shops will be dressed and ready for Christmas earlier and earlier every year. We try to stick to October just because we're not a high street shop and we have to remember that we're at the Abbey.
I'm searching for gifts for Christmas, and we get some money from the headmaster to go on Amazon and buy some gifts that we would like.
We've been given £26 to spend on our presents, and that's quite a lot. And the whole thing is how to spend it.
How much is it, ma'am? Is it? It's £32. You can't get it. No, but how much is the limit? 26.
The headmaster keeps them in his office when they arrive, but he wraps them up and we open them on Christmas Day. So as soon as everyone gets up, we're allowed to go downstairs and open them.
Christmas at the Abbey is a wonderful time. I mean, most of the people that come to the Abbey are visitors, and so you're sort of joining in with their fun and sense of celebration of being on holiday. For a lot of people, they'll be coming out of the Abbey and saying, this was the best bit of Christmas for me.
It's Monday morning today, and we're overseeing the erection of the Christmas tree on North Green, and that's what I like about our job here. The works department get involved in all types of activities and jobs that go on. 1 minute we're here all night long trying to get the heating going, next minute we're doing a nice job like this, erecting a Christmas tree. That's what makes it such a wonderful place to work.
Usually there are problems with their radiators, the offices, and I think also the deanery.
OK, John, I'll get on to it.
The choir is preparing for the annual Christmas Carol concert, which will be attended by over 1,000 people.
I very much enjoy it because it's the only non-liturgical occasion, in other words, not a service, that people can sing with the Abbey Choir. And also I get to conduct them. I'll turn around and I sort of encourage them, cajole them into it a bit. The choir enjoys it because normally we sing day after day all through the year and never get a round of applause. So it's quite nice when you're in a concert situation to be able to look the audience in the eye and know that if they like it afterwards, they're going to show their appreciation.
Once in Royal David City is, one of the quite a famous carol, and right at the beginning has one of the most wanted solos.
Yeah, it's quite traditional for each year, and one boy will do that solo.
It's really wanted because first of all, it's quite exposed and everyone can hear you, and that's quite a nice feeling. It's just a great piece and a great carol to sing, and that's quite near the beginning of the concert, and it's quite special.
We put a lot of effort into it and a lot of time into rehearsing those pieces, and we still haven't absolutely sort of... we don't actually know who's doing the solos yet.
No.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a very great pleasure to welcome you all here after Evensong to this brief moment when we're going to light the Christmas tree. Simply switch it on. Like that.
I'm really looking forward to Christmas. I'm looking at my advent calendar and saying, go quicker, go quicker, go quicker, go quicker. I like carols because they're all cheery and it means Christmas is soon.
For the first and second year boys, term ends in the middle of December, but the older choristers are on duty until the afternoon of Christmas Day itself.
People say, when do you break up for Christmas? On Christmas Day, and they're like, oh, that's not very good, is it? But actually, we do so much in Christmas periods. We go to the cinema, we go to the theatre, then we've got all the big services, and, they're always exciting.
On Christmas Eve, we get like a movie to watch because we have midnight mass, which is really fun. I know it's midnight, which is tiring, but it's still really fun.
And then on Christmas Day, you go down to the library and you get a stocking. It's really good. And then you go down to the music room and you get your presents and you play with it. It's really, really fun.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Christmas here at Westminster Abbey. And somehow there is a timelessness about this place. Look at this. It's like being a child all over again.
Sends a shiver up and down your spine. It can bring a tear to the eye sometimes.
It's always spine-tingling hearing the Once in Royal, because I sang Once in Royal quite a few times in my dad's parish, so I get a sense of what they're going through. So my stomach's in a knot.
You have a bit of nerves, but not.
I'm performing from the organ loft, so I'll be quite high above the congregation. I feel quite nervous because it's very, very exposed. There's no organ part playing with me, and there's no other choral part singing with me.
Once in royal David city stood a lowly cattle shed.
Speaking very personally, I find much of the life of the Abbey intensely moving. And I find it almost impossible, personally, to sing all the Christmas hymns, because I find myself breaking down at some point. I just can't complete the verse.
Walking around the Abbey when it's completely empty. That's the time when this building really does, wrap itself around you in this most beautiful and hauntingly wondrous way. And I constantly sort of have to pinch myself sometimes that what I'm part of, what I'm helping to look after, is something of such extraordinary beauty and such extraordinary importance. That to me is pretty overwhelming at times.
It is a very special place to work and live, really so. And Christmas makes it doubly so, I think.
Whatever kind of destabilises our world in other ways, in the secular world, and whatever we go through, I think that in places like the Abbey, I would like to think that the music and the liturgical worship of the Abbey will continue and will flourish.
The Abbey will continue to represent faith at the heart of the nation, and I'm absolutely confident that faith will not fly from the heart of our nation.